Hello, thank you so much for joining me today. This is Cheryl. I'm so glad you're here. I have these Chameleon color changing mica powders that I bought for resin and have used many times for that. And I was just curious whether I could use them with paper crafting. Now, they don't have a binding agent in them like Perfect Pearls does, so I can't just use them as is for watercolors. So for the video today, I'm going to mix them with a gloss gel medium and use them in two different ways. I'm going to stencil with them, and then I'm going to jelly print with them and just kind of see what happens. So in this set, there are 8 different colors. Four of them are kind of a bronzy coppery tone, and then 4 of them have a blue tone. So Gum Arabic is what you would use as a binding agent if you wanted to do watercoloring with them, and I'll experiment with that at some point. But like I said, I'm going to use some gloss gel medium to mix these into. I'm making 8 daubs of the gloss gel medium to mix my 8 colors into, and I'll tell you what the colors are as I mix them. The first one I'm going to do in the top left corner is fuchsia. So I'm using just a little end of a Slurpee straw. You could use a small spoon, popsicle stick, whatever you want, to put a little bit onto your gel medium. And then I'm using a palette knife to mix it in. So I'm not going to clean my palette knife between colors. I'm just going to kind of scrape it off on my work surface as best I can. When I go to use this with stencils, I'm not going to clean off my palette knife between colors anyways. And I'm just curious to see what the difference between the colors, how easy it is to see the difference in the finished projects. But I am going to be mixing several different colors together because I think that's going to be the most interesting look. So the color that I'm mixing now on the top right is plum. The next one that I'm going to go for is called green. Even though it doesn't look green at all, it has a bit of a green shimmer to it, but other than that, it looks more coppery. So these mica powders, like I said, I'm mixing them with a gloss gel medium, and I'm going to use just white cardstock today. I realized after I did this that when I'd used them with resin, I'd used them with black resin as well, and they showed off really, really well. So my next video, I'm going to do the same experiment, but with different stencils and do it on black cardstock. So the color now that I'm mixing is gold. And you can tell just by looking at the mixes with the gel medium that they have a little bit of a different look to them, but they're fairly close in color. The only one when it was dry that I saw a real noticeable difference is the fuchsia one. So now I'm going to do the bluey tealy colors. The first one I'm going to mix is called violet. And yeah, it doesn't look like it's violet, but it does have a bit of a violet shimmer when you twist it in the light. Now you'll notice I'm only doing 1 scoop per pile of gloss gel medium, and really for the project that I'm doing, that is enough. If you wanted to add more, you absolutely could. Once it was done though, I didn't feel like it needed really any more. You could definitely add less and have a lighter color. That one there that I put on that gloss gel medium is called Galaxy. It's a really, really pretty color. Now, one of the reasons why I'm doing this experiment is because craft supplies aren't cheap. So it's always great when we can use supplies for more than they're really intended to do. So that color that I'm doing right now is cyan. So by doing this, I am just checking and seeing if these mica powders have a little bit more use than just using with the resin, which they absolutely should, simply because they are mica powder and there are mica powders that are intended for paper crafting. But this experiment, because these are color shifting ones, I thought it would be really cool to see what would happen in using them with card making and with jelly printing and stuff like that. So the last color that I am mixing is just plain blue. It does have some color shifting, but it is called blue. So for this experiment, like I said, I'm just using white cardstock. My next video, I will do the same experiment but with black cardstock, and then at the end I'll compare the look of the two and just see how they're similar and how they're different. And I'm also only using a clear gloss gel medium for this, basically to keep this video shorter rather than longer. The more I experiment and try different colors or different mediums to mix them in, the longer the video. So I may try at a different time using other mediums, but for right now, we're just using gloss gel medium. So you just saw me, I just wrote down all the colors that I was using, where they were located just for this video so I could tell you what the colors were called. Now I have a tray like you just saw that has water in it. So as I'm done with the stencil, I'm just going to put it in the tray with water so that I don't have to stop and clean each and every stencil each time. You don't want to leave this stuff to dry on the stencil, otherwise it's much harder to get off and you have a risk of damaging your stencils. So I have a snowflake stencil here, and I'm going to use all 4 of the blue tones to go through this stencil. There's not really a rhyme or reason as to which color I'm putting where. I want them to mix together, and I'm trying to just use a little bit of each one so that I can experiment with several different stencils between the colors. And I do want the colors to combine. I am making sure that the palette knife is removing anything that's higher than the stencil. That's just going to take a lot longer to dry if there's more on there. So I'm going to take my stencil off. The painter's tape that I'm using, I can just reuse for each and every stencil. And the stencil is going to go into my tray of water, and I will put my paper aside to dry. Now between each and every stencil, I will be wiping off my mat with just a baby wipe. You could use just a wet cloth or whatnot, and then drying it with a paper towel so I have a dry surface to work on. This is the only time I'm actually showing it to you so that you know that that needs to be done each and every time. Otherwise you're going to get some paste on the back of your future pieces. And by drying off your surface, you'll know that you're not going to have damp cardstock underneath your stencil. Now that baby wipe can just be used over and over again until it's completely used up. The next stencil I'm using here is just a bubble stencil, and I'm not going to fill in the bubbles completely. I'm trying to use less of the gel medium so that I can so that I can experiment a little bit more. I'm also just kind of curious how this is going to look with half-filled bubbles. In the end, it looks a little bit like fish scales, which is really kind of cool. And once again, I'm mixing up the 4 different blue tones just to create a different shift in colors between them. So I'm going to pull that stencil off, clean up my area, put my stencil in the water, and then move on to the next stencil. I take these and I wait probably a good hour before working on them. Depending on the time of day, sometimes I'll just wait till the next day. Some pastes will take a little bit longer than others, but you do want to make sure that it is completely dry before you go and use them for a project. So the next one I have is this really cool wave stencil. Once again, I'm going to use a little bit of each of the blue tones for this. I'm trying to make that gel medium go as far as possible with it. This would have been cool to have a little bit of texture paste in with it as well, just to have some white foam for the top of the waves. But like I said, I was only using gel medium for this, just to keep the experiment as short as possible for you guys. Now in the end, by having that tray of water beside that I could easily just pop my stencils into, by the time I was done using my stencils, or done doing the stenciling and ready to go clean them, because the stuff had been sitting in water, I pretty much just needed to rinse those stencils off. It made the cleanup so easy. So I highly recommend having a dish that you can do that with. Now obviously, because we're using mica powders and gel mediums, it's not something that I would use in a dish that was also meant to serve food. This is a dish that I have in my craft room for different purposes, crafting related, and it's not going to have food in it. So my wave is done. I'm going to pop that to the side. And now I have one, it's a mosaic tile looking one. I'm going to start working with the coppery colors. I have a tiny little bit of blue left on my palette knife. I'm just going to scrape it through. So this is the only one where I have a little bit of blue in with those coppery tones. And the same way I did the blue, using a little bit of each of the 4 colors, I'm going to do that with the coppery tones as well. I just want to see the differences between the colors and basically see if you're able to distinguish them. And some of them you are, some of them the color change is a little bit more subtle. I can't wait to do this on the black just to see what the difference is and if it's a lot more noticeable on a black surface than it is on a white surface. Once again, once this is done, I'm going to pull everything up, clean my area, and let this completely dry. My next stencil is this flower one, and it's actually one of my favorite ones. I use a lot. You probably noticed that. I just love how the flowers come in from the side, and I'm excited to see what these colors look like through the flower stencil. So the process is exactly the same. I'm just going to let you watch. So now I'm done using stencils. I am going to see what happens when we use a jelly plate with this. So the very first way I'm going to use the jelly plate is I'm going to use up a little bit of those mediums that are still left on my mat to the side and do a print that way. I have an old Cuttlebug plate that I put my jelly plate on. This is just so that if I happen to need to lift it up or whatever, it's very easy to handle. I'm also going to put a piece of cardstock underneath so that you can see the color a little bit better. I was kind of surprised that the jelly prints actually were a lot more subtle than I thought they were going to be. I thought the colors would show off a little bit more. And it's really interesting that the shimmer isn't all over necessarily. It's kind of in different areas. So the prints came out really, really interesting. And I'm just going to let you take a moment to watch. Right now I'm using up all of the mica powders that I have mixed with the gel medium, and after that I'm going to use a fan brush just to sprinkle the mica powders on the plate and then use the gel medium with a brayer to roll it around and take prints like that. So I'm done all my stenciling and jelly printing. This is the finished pieces before I create some cards out of them. And like I said, some of the different colors you're able to see in the stenciled image as well as the jelly printing. And some are a little bit more subtle. The prints turned out really, really cool and random. They're definitely not all over prints, and I use them just for die cutting. I'm not going to use any of these for this project as a background. I'm just going to die cut them all just because they're so unique. I figured that was the best use of them. And now here's a use or a look at the cards that were created. So this one I die cut the plaid background, and I also used one of the prints for the background of the butterfly. This one I die cut some birds and have them sitting on a wire. And I love the random shimmer that those jelly prints created. This one I die cut them into some leaves and used that for a card. My cards are very, very simple because I wanted basically the jelly prints or the mica prints to be the star of the card. So I didn't want to complicate them too much and have focus turned away from them. So those top ones are all done, ones that have die cuts on them. And then the bottom are all stencil backgrounds that were enhanced to create cards. So the flowers there, I just added a butterfly to it and a sentiment. And the parts that I pointed out there were parts of the flower that looked really, really fuchsia, which is why the butterfly is the color that it is. So this big snowflake, I used some metallic shimmer papers that I already had, as well as the jelly print to create the snowflake. I just got this Killer Whale color layer stamp recently and decided to create a card with that one using the bubbles that look like fish scales. And the last one, I created some funky insects with the colors that were reflecting on that stencil print. And I also used some stencil or some jelly prints for those as well. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you'd like to see more videos.